We're here with Dan Plesac, Xavier Scruggs. Welcome back. You came back?
You.
I wasn't sure.
Yes.
you know,
I couldn't let you just have one.
That's it. All right. All right. I told you what I thought. Give me what you think of the outfield market.
I agree with you. At the top, you have Judge just stands out to me, and Nimmo's brought his way. If I'm looking at, I want somebody that can do a little bit of both. And I think right now, a guy that sticks out to me, Michael Conforto. And now you're going, whoa, he hasn't played in a while. Yep. But this is a guy, you go back 2017, 2018, 2019, 30 home run guy, can knock in between 85 and 90, gets on base, good defender, plays a little bit of right field. He can steal some bases. He's not that far removed, Brian, from being a marquee-type outfielder. Had an injury working out before the pandemic, and he had some surgery on his right shoulder. He missed all of this past season. But to me, Brian, you're always looking for some quality and looking for some value. Yeah. This is a guy that you might be able to buy low on. Maybe an incentive-laden contract, a guy that's a hungry player wanting to get out there to reestablish himself again, wants to get out, be an everyday player, and maybe the right organization can get out in front and get a guy like Conforto.
You see right there the OPS plus that's on the bottom of the screen right there, what's over there. Now, so he was in the 130s comfortably year after year. He had his one bad year, which was league average, and then he didn't play last year, so he's fallen off. I'll say this. His production was such that it warranted the type of contract I wouldn't be willing to give him. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
It's like, because you could say, wait, this guy can hit. And I'm like, yeah, he's going to command an enormous amount of money, and I don't know if I want to spend that. All right, give me somebody that you love.
Yeah, and to that point, I think the value that you mentioned is extremely important. Once you get past that first tier, there's question marks with a lot of those guys that you mentioned. One of the guys that you mentioned I think is interesting is Mitch Haniger, right? He had some injuries last year, had the ankle sprains, but if I'm going to take a high-risk, high-reward opportunity on a guy, I look at Mitch Haniger being a guy that can have some offensive production in the middle of my order when he's playing, right? He's got to be healthy, but let's not forget, this guy, a year removed from 39 home runs in 2021. So I think the power production is still there, and I want you to check out the OPS plus each year since 2017.
Excellent.
He's been better than league average every single year. So if I'm going to give a guy an opportunity to take a risk on a guy, I may even put him above guys like Kiermaier and Benintendi in that second tier that you have, just because I'm already taking a risk in that second tier. So I'm looking for the best value. Mitch Haniger might be that guy for me.
You're swinging a little harder. You want a little more contact.
Yes.
Right? You want to try.
So maybe a team that can afford, they have a little bit of outfield depth that they can afford an opportunity to take a risk.
I'll say this. I know we do this is based on data and numbers, but I want a certain level of production. Past that, once I know the production is there, you want reliability, and I like guys who you see that can play, as we used to say, the right way. But the language is there. I want to be more specific. I'm just making stuff up. Nimmo, Haniger, Jerks, and Profar, I love those guys. I love the way they play. Profar isn't going to hit like those big guys, but Haniger and Nimmo, they have to play. Right? So if suddenly I'm looking at 15, 20 million a year, I'm like, I can't have you not show up for a year. That's what I'd be worried about.
And you know, the last 2 years, the more and more you watch Nimmo play, at least in my opinion, the more and more I really like the player.
Love him.
He gets on base.
Yes.
He brings a lot of energy to the ballpark.
Positive energy.
He does. And he's vastly improved in center field. And I know a lot of Mets fans, when they drafted him initially, like, what are we doing taking this guy? You know, the baseball where he wasn't a real big thing where he came from. But I'm going to tell you what, the more I watch him, the more I like him. He can steal bases. You touched on it, Brian. He brings energy to the ballpark, and it's real. And he plays with some flair, and I think he could help a lot of teams.
He's had a 400 on base, I think, in 3 of his last 5 years. There's nobody getting a 400 on base anymore, except the superstars who have enormous power. He's that rare guy. It's almost like it just flashed in my head. Remember, like, I was really on the Jason Worth bandwagon way back when. And then suddenly he signs for what? Oh, wow, that was more than I thought. Like when the Nationals signed him for a mega contract. But they valued him for all those, not intangibles, tangibles and extra things as well. So that's where I'm at with, like, if I love Nimmo, but if suddenly it's like a guy who has had trouble staying on the field and you're saying, well, it's going to take $150, $200 million. I'm like, oh, I didn't know it was going to take that.
I think it depends on what you're willing to spend the money on, right? If you're looking at your team needs more power production, then I'm looking at, okay, who are some guys that I may take a risk on that have a little bit more power? But to your point about on-base percentage, maybe I have the power established already, like a Yankees team, and I need guys that can get on base a little bit more at a higher clip so I can have guys that they can drive in.
I think this is what it will be like in baseball ops, is that where it's like, who do you like? Who appeals to you? Why? What do we need? Who do we love? Judge, there's a lot to love, but it comes at such a cost.
And some team defense may be of importance more, like if I want a Kevin Kiermaier.
Right, no question. Kiermaier's and his hitting was about league average last time we saw him, again, before he got injured. Let's bring in Keith Law of The Athletic. He has his own top 50 free agent list. Keith, great to have you back on the show. Thanks for coming back on.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start at the top. Your thoughts on Aaron Judge, because I believe he is not your number one free agent. How do you figure? What's your criteria here?
So it is, and to be clear, it's not that he's not the best player. I think you said earlier, he's the best player in free agency. He is, we agree, but I wouldn't give him the biggest contract because, and you mentioned a few of these things, because of his age, because of the history of sluggers his size. Very, very few position players in Major League history who are 6'6" or taller. He's 6'7", and he's a big 6'7", right? We just don't have historical comps for players who look like him. They don't age well. They generally are done around 32, 33. You've got my 3 right there. Yes, that's it. That's the whole list of guys that tall who were still able to play even somewhat regularly at age 31 or older. And Judge is going to be looking for a deal. It's going to take him well into his mid, even to his late 30s. I couldn't do that, especially not when comparing him to the guy who is my number one free agent, Carlos Correa, who is much younger and plays a critical position in the middle of the field and projects to age much better over the life of, say, a 7, 8, 10-year contract than Aaron Judge would.
Keith, the height thing. I would almost like, I hate to bring an analogy for another sport, but it's almost like in heavyweight boxing. Until we started getting regularly 6'6", 6'7" heavyweights, it was just, well, the guys who do that, they can't, the guys who are that tall can't fight. Until there's a regular wave of 6'6" and 6'7" guys, they're like, oh no, actually they can box. We just needed more of them to see guys with those skills. Are we just seeing a new wave of player with this skill and that height?
Look, it's a great point. And the way I tried to approach my ranking was from the team side and thinking of this as these are investments. You're making an investment in a player, in a real human being, not to take any of that away. But if you're trying to think about where do I put my money, I want to see how comparable players throughout baseball history, even if it's just recent baseball history, how have they fared? How have they aged? How has their production gone? Have they gotten hurt more, which seems to be a very big issue, no pun intended, with very big position players. We do see this a little bit with pitchers. I think the inflection point with pitchers is probably more like 6'8", 6'9" or so. But with position players, it does seem like there's a bit of an upper bound on how tall you can be and still be a healthy and productive hitter past age 31 or 32. The great historical exception is Dave Winfield, who's 6'6". He was about 30 pounds lighter than Aaron Judge at the same age, and Winfield was next level athlete, right? You're old enough to remember. I'm old enough to remember him. He was a 3-sport athlete coming out of college. And he's a unicorn, really, in baseball history. So you could argue Judge is another unicorn. That's entirely possible. If we've seen one, I guess there's a better chance we'll see a second one. But the odds are against Judge doing that.
Right. Okay. It's funny. I push back on it, but I know you said a key phrase there that I often bring up. It's like, oh, I like this player. I like this player. Well, would you spend this for him? It's like, wait, when you're backing up the truck, it's a different level of infatuation. I must love him. I'm backing up the truck for this guy. Keith, stay right there. We're going to get Keith's top 5. We're going to dig a little deeper, get into the outfield, and get into the starting pitcher market as well. But